So our first speaker is Nigel Goodrich. As a former school principal, national curriculum developer, senior examiner, and educational consultant, you were the leading researcher in the analysis of shaping minds, shaping society. Can you share with us the findings of this research? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Patricia. This is a report that you referred to that we published a short while ago. Maybe I'll just pass this around in case anybody would like to have a look, a quick look through that. The genesis of the report was the alarming data of 2024, 2025, is that anti-Semitic incidents in Belgium have surged by more than 1,000% since October the 7th, 2023. Jewish youth in Antwerp are pushed off bikes, buses are stoned with slurs like dirty Jew, and fully 42% of Belgian Jews consider emigrating rather than stay in Belgium, as systematic hate, somebody said, feels like October the 7th every day. As a member of the European Jewish Congress said, Ariella Wojcik, who is a parent, she said, you leave your child in a public school where they are a target, or you move them to a Jewish school and the school becomes a target. So what's happening in schools? That's what we wanted to find out. Well, there are no school books in Belgian schools anymore, but what you do have are teachers who have autonomy, and they're helped in their teaching profession by organizations, NGOs, and media who produce materials for subjects for them to teach. In Belgium, the competence for education lies with the linguistic communities, not with the federal government. But there is an exception to that. The United Nations has a Sustainable Development Goal Program for 2030, and in Belgium, a budget and responsibility for that has been given to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, who passed it to their adjunct Directorate General for Overseas Development, who have very strong direct connections through ENABLE, the development organization, to NGOs, media, and other partners. They're called partners. So there's a direct line of funding between the government and the providers of educational material. Of course, in the last 15 years, as we know, we've seen an explosion in the internet and in media, in classrooms. It's not the same landscape as the one I knew all those years ago. When we did our analysis, we tried to be as objective as possible. We looked at a sample of 57 school materials from various media that deal with the Palestinian-Israel conflict. First thing we did was look at the frequency of online items about that particular conflict and all the other conflicts on the Flemish educational website called Classement. And we also looked at NGOs in Flanders and in the French-speaking community for what they were providing for young people about conflicts around the world. And what we found, well, if you have your program, you can scan the summary document. I'm looking at page 3 of that. You'll see the graphs was huge disproportion in looking at the Palestinian-Israel conflict, almost as if there is no other conflict in the world, almost as if other people who are suffering terribly don't matter, and they don't matter because they're not in that particular area. It was really quite outstanding to see the disproportion. There must be a reason for that, because it's not just disproportionate, it's also partisan, because 100% of the resources were critical of one party in that conflict and not of the other. And by critical, I mean savagely critical. What we did was to come up with a series of research indicators. We read the materials from UNESCO, we read the material from the European Commission. We looked at objectivity, neutrality, information about avoiding bias, critical thinking, all the statements that Belgian schools and the ministries have signed up to as examples of good practice. And we resolved them into 9 indicators. For example, the number 2 is what we called anti-Israel anti-Semitism, which many people say is the latest iteration of anti-Semitism. And number 3 was looking at whether material is based upon evidence. And if it's not evidence-based, then it has no place in schools. We analyzed every sentence, phrase, map, and image. So let me give you an example of something that we found. This is perhaps one of the worst documents that we came across. It was a fiche, a compendium of material for teachers produced under the auspices of the then Minister for Overseas Development at the Directorate General of Overseas Development, about the Palestinian-Israel conflict, because teachers had said, we're struggling in our classrooms. Kids are asking us about this thing and we don't know how to teach it. Well, the document equates Hamas terrorists with the kibbutzim security teams. It takes an equivalence for the participants in that conflict. This is one of the questions that the children were asked. What are we to think of the perpetrators of terrorist acts who hide in the middle of the civilian population rather than show themselves? Do you think they lack courage? Or do you think they lack honesty? What would you do if you were in their shoes? Asking young people to put themselves in the shoes, empathetically, of terrorists. And this document uses inflammatory language, emotional appeals, and persistent inaccuracies. It is, in our estimation, dangerous. And it comes from the federal government. We found, page 5 of our summary document, if you're looking at the scan of that, 75% of the material analyzed was revealed by the research indicators to be anti-Semitic in some form. UNESCO put out a statement in one of their documents saying that anti-Semitic narrative tends to be simplistic, one-dimensional, promotes bias, and is not evidence-based. There are 4 characteristics. 75% of the materials contain all 4 of those characteristics of anti-Semitic material, and 98% inhibit critical thinking. Well, Sabrina talks about black and white. You're quite right, Sabrina. There's no gray in these materials at all. And because of that, we had to devise a 10th indicator on likely to promote radicalization. 60% of the material, according to the indicator, risks fueling radicalization. And they do it in simple ways. An example is a very popular video produced by the Flemish broadcaster, VRT, for children in primary school, where an expert on the Middle East crisis is asked the question, what's the conflict all about? And his answer is, well, it's Jews versus Palestinians. Jews versus Palestinians. Can you see the racism in that? Can you see how young people are being steered towards a certain way of equating Jews with Israel? In 1948, when Israel was founded, many Palestinians fled or were expelled, the experts said, but there's nothing about context. 7 Arab nations attacking Israel and telling Palestinians, or rather telling Arabs to leave so that the Jews could be wiped out and then they could return to their homes. None of this is included. And I mention this not to be an advocate for Israel, but to be an advocate for critical thinking, because only one side is heard in these materials. So what impression will children have of the Jewish state or of Jews? No wonder one of the worksheets that we analyzed on a state-funded educational website asked this question: why are the Jews not loved? Will you take part in a demonstration to support Palestinians and being against Israel? So texts without context are surely pretexts. We found pervasive, politicized, anti-Jewish, anti-Israel propaganda in the majority of those materials. Materials that play on the emotions of young people and their sentiments to reinforce hostile feelings, intolerance that leads to polarization and is likely to lead to radicalization. So in summary, there are 6 takeaways. Number 1, the Directorate General of Overseas Development and its agencies have funded biased materials via NGOs, political NGOs, and they have politicized global citizenship education as advocacy to achieve their ends as, to quote themselves, political advocacy and mobilization amongst young people, but only for one political agenda. Secondly, state funding for ideologically based content raises concerns about perpetuating prejudices and violating educational principles. Thirdly, early exposure, and Sabrina mentioned this again, in primary schools deepens polarization, intolerance, and anti-Semitism. Has no place in primary schools, looking at a complex conflict in a bipolar way. And fourthly, media must separate opinions from facts in their content and not impose their own agenda. Number 5, there's an urgent need for evaluation of content providers here in Belgium to achieve or ensure neutrality and objectivity. And finally, the regional ministers in Belgium must control and take responsibility for what is taking place in their classrooms. And the federal ministers must instigate an urgent review of state funding of political NGOs. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.